Hello, everyone. Coach Evan is here, and I'm happy to break down the motion this house prefers, a world where all art is created anonymously. I'm pretty sure you did well this Wednesday debating this motion at World Schools Debate League. However, there is always room for improvement, and I hope you'll find a few of my suggestions how to debate this motion useful. Also, I'm going to comment on how to generally debate motions about art so that you may find this mini workshop valuable for generally thinking how to approach art motions. For doing so, we need to cover four things. First of all, establish the context of this motion. Second of all, to give definitions. Third, to consider key burdens and strategies. And lastly, to discuss arguments for both sides. Let's start with the context. There are already some artists who publish their art anonymously. The most famous one is Banksy, whose masterpiece you can see as my virtual background. There are different reasons why artists are publishing now their art anonymously. We can consider at least three of them. First, which is true historically, in particular in the 20th century, uh, graffiti culture was built around the idea of anonymity, because otherwise uh, people who would draw graffiti on public property would be fined or sometimes even sent to prison. It was pretty much the origins of graffiti on the streets of New York. But also it's true nowadays for multiple countries where political institutions are not that inclusive, and where artists need to hide their identity out of fear of being persecuted. Another motive for artists to hide their identity and publish their artwork anonymously is the sincere belief that it helps to promote ideas and aesthetic value behind their art, and not blind the audience with discussions that are not relevant, they believe, to their artwork, such things as their gender, sexuality, or their appearance. Last thing, anonymity is currently used by some artists as a way to gain some popularity. Famous bands as Gorillaz and Lordi, they built their fame around this uh, semi anonymous identities, when they would put some virtual avatars as part of the characters on the band, or would put on a mask to hide themselves in their performances. However, the majority of artists, they do not publish their artwork for anonymously for good reasons. We can consider practical things such as copyright issues. It's easier to promote your art when people know whose art they buy and there is a name underneath. And some artists just frankly looking for fame, and they enjoy being validated by millions of their followers. Uh, which means the majority of artists, they now have legitimate reasons not to publish their art anonymously. However, the motion that we're considering here takes a radical step. We're imagining a society of all artists turn into Banksy, largely with no ability to establish the authorship behind the artwork. For doing so, we're considering two major clashes that are true for most, if not all, art motions. First is aesthetic value of artwork, whether we'll have better art, will have worse art. In this motion, it means the following question. Um, if art is published anonymously, Does it mean that we'll be able to appreciate in depth aesthetics, emotional appeal, values behind and ideas behind the motion, or we will miss out on something that is also integral, as a position will argue, to the art, which is the background, the biography, the very identity of the author who creates this art. Second clash that this motion raises is social change. Please mind that art generates strong impacts. Art is omnipresent, art is everywhere. It's about ideas, it's about values, it's about aesthetics, which means there is a big influence on society, and there is a huge potential for social change, depending what art forms we have as dominant narratives in our society. As a result, proposition will be likely arguing that having art published anonymously means us resolving a problem of appreciating art upon someone's privileged identities versus having it as blind auditions in concert, when we will be able to provide more diverse we'll be able to give more opportunities to a more diverse set of artists to express their art. Or probably as a position will be arguing in this debate, it will all lead to us not having actual data on the problem, and we will have all anonymous artists who are publishing their art without us being able to hold accountable any institutional discrimination cases in art world. This is what generally the debate is about. Now, let's quickly dwell on the definition of art and to largely take away some misconception that you might have. Please think about art in comprehensive way, meaning that it's music you listen to, it's books you read, it's films you watch, it's statues and graffitis in public spaces. In other words, again, art is everywhere. Do not have a narrow definition and narrow understanding of art as oil paintings in fancy museums. It is important for this motion as part of realization how to impact your arguments, in particular on social change. Now, third thing to discuss is key burdens. There are two things to highlight. First, the motion is built upon comparative. You have to compare two worlds. It's not enough for you to assert that there will be aesthetic value on our side of artists being able to avoid personal criticism upon random characteristics. You should compare it to the world that opposition has, building this explicit comparisons in all the arguments you're building. It will be part of a burden for both teams, and generally teams who will be building up better comparison will have high chances of winning. Second thing here is government has somewhat high burden to prove, because you have to argue that all art should be published anonymously. While for opposition, it's a smart strategy to argue that, well, we don't mind to have some artists like Banksy that we have in the status quo to publish their art anonymously, but also we would like to have artists who would like to leverage the experience, leverage their identity to promote certain artwork and certain ideas where the identity and their background becomes central to their art. As a result, if you're on a position, please highlight that there is high burden on the government side. It will be a smart framework, a smart strategy for you to use. Question then, what to do for the government side? You can also argue that now we don't have much of a freedom for artists because they're coerced, in fact, to publish their art in a way that is almost exclusively public. Banksy is just exception, and some other artists, they're exceptions. But considering that the entire system established in such a way that it's already extremely difficult for you to promote your art, and without publishing your name, it becomes close to impossible. When there is an artist whose name is on the label, you won't be able to sell your art, despite there are some platforms, there are some galleries where art is shown anonymously. So that will be your way to argue that, in fact, choice that we have now for artists, it's quite illusionary, it's quite coercive. Therefore, a better form would be to build a world of equality of opportunities where, in fact, none will be judged upon their identity when they publish the artwork, but they will be judged upon the merits of the artwork. Thus, we are proceeding to the fourth part of today's discussion, key arguments for government enterprisation. Let's start with aesthetics, which is going to be a big clash in this debate. For the government, you can plausibly argue 5 things, obviously more, but I would narrow down to 5. First thing you can argue is that aesthetic value of art is better on the government side because you're solving the problem of perpetuating aesthetics of art that is built upon reputation of the author. For you to understand it, we can consider the case of Pablo Picasso, which is one of the most, if not the most, celebrated artist whose paintings are sold for dozens of millions of dollars, and they're one of the most expensive paintings in the world. The thing is, his paintings close to the end of his life, they look as if it's drawn by a 5-year-old kid. And it's quite in contrast to art he created before this. However, it still costs millions of dollars. In other words, because he has this big name under his belt, when you are investor, and right now art is used as a big investment market, you will keep buying art because of a name, not because of aesthetic value behind this. However, we're solving this problem by making all art anonymous, which means if I see there is a painting that looks like it's a 5-year-old kid drawn this, I would treat it accordingly. What the impact of this? We'll be able to judge art in a more objective manner, in such a way that capitalist system with all the billions of dollars that super wealthy use as part of investment won't be able to perpetuate certain aesthetic standards just because someone has a name. This way we'll be able to see true aesthetic value of art upon its merit, not imposing standards upon someone's access to money and someone's previous fame. Second argument that you can build around the clash on aesthetics is politicization of art. One of problems with art is oftentimes politicized, and it's linked to authority. There are 2 famous cases. One is quite old. There was a composer, Wagner, a German composer, whose music was used in Nazi Germany. As a result, some orchestras, they refused to play his music, not because even Wagner himself supported Nazism, no, but just because his music was used as a part of Nazi ideology and was celebrated by some Nazi members. There is some rejection of his music. In other words, we're rejecting art not because of its aesthetic value, but just because of a random factor that the author did not have any control over. A more recent example is Tchaikovsky, a Russian composer whose art right now partially boycotted, or at least not played currently in some orchestras around the world, just because Russia invaded Ukraine. There is a war going on. You can build an impact here, arguing that art should be judged independently from the author, because actions in these cases of author, they're independent from the way how certain ideologies use this art. There is no any intrinsic meaning in making this art evil. However, there is still a huge aesthetic value of creating a sense of awe by bringing this sophisticated music that inspires you while you listen to this music. Thus, making art anonymous solve the problem of politicization of art. Third argument you can argue on the clash of aesthetics will be around the idea of how artists sometimes put into certain boundaries that if they deviate from or step out from, then this art becomes criticized. As a result, they don't even try to step out of these boundaries. For example, if I'm a famous artist and I was writing certain books or creating poetry or playing some music, and I have built up some followership, and there is certain expectation from me to produce similar type of art, not to experiment, not to start introducing art that is completely different, because there is a risk that my fans will reject it. And as a result, I'm less likely will be experimenting with my art. In other words, aesthetic value and quality of art will likely is likely worse when it's not anonymous, because artists are framed within these boundaries. But also, there is certain expectation from artists of performing art in relation to their identity. If you're of certain background, you would not be supposed to perform music that will be prescribed to certain ethnic, national, or religious groups. Thus limiting opportunity to experiment with art and making art not universal, but rather locked into closed off boundaries. Again, the harm here that there is less creativity, there is less of diversity. As a result, there is less of a chance to create such art that will strike the chords of someone's soul and resonate with people because of aesthetic value behind, not because of who produced this art. Fourth potential argument you can build is how sometimes artists abuse their artwork for money, just because they already built some name, and they know that almost whatever they produce will be bought, and they don't need to work extra hard to publish yet again another album, to publish yet another book. A couple of examples here. Kanye West has this, it's difficult to say when a song, a record of his voice that has over 3 million views on YouTube. And it seems whatever Kanye West does, since he had this huge followership, he will be listened to. He doesn't need to try hard. As a result, there is kind of a little bit of a junk quality art. Another example, more classic one, is Dostoevsky. He was a gambler and he was addicted to playing cards in casino or playing roulette. And when he built his name, and he needed money now as soon as possible. He would write pages of his books or some stories and will rush to the publisher and give this writing so that he would get money now. And the publisher would take it because it's Dostoevsky. He already became famous. But if he was anonymous, it means he wouldn't be able to pull this trick. He would have to polish his text. He would have to work hard so that there is a quality to it. Not speaking that Dostoevsky's books are not good enough, but it could be even better. Last and final thing, why aesthetic value will be better for the government side. When artists are anonymous, it means they're less likely to be distracted by such things as personal fame, when fans follow them, send them some messages online confessing in love, or there are some stalkers, big problem with paparazzi and how artists lose their personal life. All of this is highly destructive. It oftentimes corrupts artists who have best of the best artistic performances or pieces of art when they were at the beginning of their career. But when they reach this fame, this fame then corrupts them and destroys creativity, destroys their ability to create quality art. So that's one more argument you can make on high aesthetic value of art if all art is published anonymously. Now, let's consider a position case on the same clash, on aesthetics. What a position can argue. There are a couple of things. First, and the most important, is the argument around intellectual enjoyment of art if you know who the author is. Art builds emotional appeal, and the very first thing, you just look at art and it generates this reaction. Oh, it's beautiful. However, for a deep understanding, you can perceive art as almost a puzzle, where author becomes an integral part of this. And knowing the artist biography, knowing the context within which the artwork was created, is a critical element for you to solve this puzzle, so that you have deep insights into his or her work, so that you will enjoy, you will be able to enjoy this art more. You'll be able to learn from this art more. For example, Dostoevsky's books become way more meaningful if you know his biography. If you know that he was sentenced to death, and just 1 minute before he was convicted, after he already prayed and he already gave away hopes that he would be alive, he was pardoned, and then he was brought back to prison from the public execution place. And if you think of this perspective of someone who was close to near-death experience, then you read Crime and Punishment, it becomes a different perspective. It becomes a different book that gives you more insights into Dostoevsky's mindset, and as such, into Raskolnikov's mindset and other characters that are well narrated in this book. So again, to build a higher pleasure and intellectual enjoyment from art, it is critical for us to understand who the author is, because the author is an integral part of this artwork. Second thing is to think about art and author as one embedded into another. And to understand this argument, we need to run a small thought experiment. Imagine you have bought a painting and you put this painting in your bedroom. and you love this painting. It's like literally the best painting you have ever seen in your life. But all of a sudden, you found out that the the artist who created this painting is a serial killer who did nastiest of nastiest things. Will it change your perspective on this painting? Won't it give this nagging feeling and disturbing feeling that this painting shouldn't be in your bedroom hanging right above you? Look, it means simply that we in fact do not perceive art completely separately from the author. And the motion argues about making art anonymous, but it doesn't mean that there is no a person behind it. It's not artificial intelligence making this art. As a result, it is in your best interest for deep and comprehensive appreciation of art to also have ability to consider ethical considerations behind whether to enjoy or not to enjoy this art. You could think of this as let's say you're vegan and you are enjoying your vegan burger, and then someone says that, look, we just pranked you, and in fact it's a beef from a real animal, from a cow. Obviously, it would be terribly disturbing for you. But the thing is, now everyone is deprived from ability to consider aesthetic value alongside with authors, with artists' biography, which is, again, you can plausibly argue not fair, but also deprives you from a more comprehensive, more nuanced evaluation of art as such. Considering that art is subjective, we can also argue that these feelings, they should be considered as legitimate way to assess art itself. Third thing, you can argue why art should be considered as high aesthetic value if you have opportunity to see who the author is the following. It's already extremely difficult to promote your art. Most artists do not have much success. They upload the music on Spotify, YouTube, and for the majority of them, there is just close to 0 clicks. However, making it anonymous makes things even more difficult. Imagine you're an artist and probably you achieved some success. You just uploaded this music and then wonderful, bang, just 1 million views. However, now you created this song and you need to create yet another one, which means it's extremely difficult. It's quite even unlikely you'll be able to replicate this success because sometimes it's just random. Someone recommended to someone this art. In other words, if you're an artist and you know in advance that it becomes even more difficult than it is right now, then comparatively, we'll have even less of artists who would try to explore this path. If we have less artists who are trying to explore the path of becoming artists, presumably we'll have less of art as such and less of choice for people to consider. So you can impact it as aesthetic value potentially would get worse, or you can impact for this argument saying another option for artists here would be to try to use somewhat clickbait strategies in a similar way as some journalists do when they have to write sensationalized articles so that people will click and watch it. The same with you trying to use more provocative art, to use means to promote your art in such a way that it will appeal to some instincts, and then we'll start again losing on high static value that potentially would be derived if there would be opportunity for you to, after achieving first success, to further leverage your identity to capitalize as the next move on the success you have built. Now, let's consider practical cases on which side of the debate gets better social change. We can argue three things for government side. First is just gives equal opportunities for artists. Right now, a big problem is that we see artists and we see their artwork. However, people are oftentimes biased. If they know that this musician of certain background, they won't listen to his music because they will have this prejudice. Well, he can't perform rap because he's of not certain background, or she can't be good at playing the violin because she's not of certain background. In other words, there is this type of a discrimination that will deprive artists from an opportunity to present their art and to have this art being evaluated upon the merits, not upon their background. As an example here, it's a good case of the auditions in the US orchestras in the 70s and 80s, when a few American orchestras, they started blind auditions that helped to increase number of female musicians in these orchestras. When you hear only music and you don't consider any other characteristics, then you're less biased, and it helped to have more women in orchestras through 70s and 80s. Second thing you can argue the social change is setting up role models. It might sound counterintuitive that if it's anonymous, what kind of role models we can build here. However, if you consider that art is mostly, historically speaking, has been dominated by man and white men, you don't have much of even thinking as, let's say, a female musician who is just like a girl who just probably goes to musical school. You're not necessarily associate yourself with Beethoven, with these great composers. You don't think that it is achievable for you. However, if you live in a world where art becomes anonymous, it means the perception that is shaped that anyone, absolutely anyone without any barriers, can pursue this as a career. Thus, there is there are no these mental barriers for you not having role models, and considering that historically speaking, there are very few role models of famous composers or even famous writers of certain backgrounds, then making it more neutral through turning it all anonymous will make things will create more aspiration for people to explore opportunities as artists and pursue their passions of becoming great artists. Third thing, how anonymity can drive social change is it removes a fear of being ostracized. Why is it important? If you have an artist who expresses his or her view in such a way that you know that you can be attacked as a person, you're less likely will be proposing ideas that will challenge the authority, will challenge power. However, when it's anonymous, chances of these, they increase. If you're not afraid of being cancelled, then you're more likely to speak your mind. Or if you publish a book and let's say you speak on social issues that you're not part of, you're not member of this group that is potentially affected, but you still have great insights on how to help this community, it might be less of a risk for you to do this. For example, it's a famous book called American Dirt that it was written by a white man, and the book is about Mexican immigrants. The issue is the book is great. It received lots of positive feedback on how well all this, how well immigrants were described in the book and how precisely were covered the issues of discrimination of immigrants in the US. However, he was criticized for the fact of him being the member of the group, of him not being the member of the group he was speaking about. The whole point is, if you remove these factors of someone's background, then you're more likely to speak of social issues in a freer way without, again, fear of being ostracized, being cancelled, or politically persecuted. It opens more opportunities to people to challenge authority and thus to drive social change. Then what opposition can argue on social change impacts? There are quite a few things. So first of all, you can clash directly on the idea of diversity, so that in fact we'll have less of artists who would represent multiple, who have different backgrounds. Why so? Considering you would be able to prove that it gets much more difficult to publish your work if you anonymous, because again, you can't build on your initial success. It will be always you having some success and then you have to repeat it, which means it gets even more difficult to make money out of your art, which means people who are historically deprived of capital will have even more difficulty to choose a career in art. Thus, more privileged groups who have access to capital, who can take this risk and can just enjoy themselves creating this art because they know that there is some inheritance, there is some already built wealth for them. This way, despite it's anonymous, we can conclude more likely the background of artists who will be publishing the ideas for most part will happen to be of privileged group. Thus, ideas that will be proposed, they will be rather representative of privileged group as well as aesthetics of the art. Second thing, on all these potential acts of discrimination that we, not potential, like factual discrimination that we do have when it comes to perception of art or being able to become a famous artist, especially when it comes to classics, without having direct data on artists' identity, it is difficult to hold institutions accountable for these acts. Since it's anonymous, we don't know any clear stats who, in what numbers produces art of certain type. Thus, if there are 90% of or 95% of all white men who play in orchestra, it will be difficult to hold them accountable because it becomes all anonymous. Obviously, a smart government site will make sure they will have a debate set up that will address it in advance. Speaking of, it's all anonymous, but we prefer when we have some characteristics as a big data sample so that we know what's going on. However, even with this framework, it's difficult to win this clash because you do need individual cases to be able to drive this change, to hold accountable the entire bands, the entire organizations. It will be easier for you to achieve this change. Second of all, it is critical to hold artists accountable for some of their actions. If artist who is a famous person and creates art and makes some misjudgment about appropriating someone's culture and indeed overstepping of these boundaries of art to the point that it becomes offensive to others, to have a tool to shame this artist or to call out this artist and to start a conversation about bigger social issue behind this particular action is critical to drive social change itself. Final third argument of social change from opposition standpoint is deep understanding who creates art. Oftentimes, art is expression of grievance and emotional pain. So, for example, blues was created as a genre on the plantations of the US. Rap and hip hop has, as part of its origins, issues of police brutality. If you know an individual behind this art, then it's much easier for you to relate through your identity to the identity of this person. And then when this person builds some popularity, he will be more likely to lead this group for a social change. Let's say if you're such a figure as Tupac or Kanye West, you have millions of followers, you can potentially drive your social, your political stance for change, which would be not feasible if you're anonymous, because people still need a hero, they need a leader, without who it will be impossible to appeal just only through the art itself. For people, it is critical to know that Tupac's background, that his mom was part of Black Panther, they do need to realize all the woes and all the hardship that certain individuals and artists go through. And oftentimes, again, art is an expression of emotional pain and grievance, and especially matters for social change, since if we know the person behind this art, we're able to relate to this individual, and thus we're more likely to commit to social activities, to acts that will drive this change forward. And it will be easier for the person who express herself and in this art to lead the campaign for bigger change. Thus, not having art anonymous are more likely to create a bigger social change. I hope all the ideas I have narrated on all this on the topic about anonymity of art you find useful and apply it in your next debates about art. Cheers.